Hey guys, this week is the Mongols. This is a request by the class for fall 2021, so I hope you guys are excited about it. I'll start us off with some quotes today. I am the punishment of God. If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you. And the second one is the greatest happiness is to scatter your enemy, to drive him before you, to see his cities reduced to ashes, to see those who love him shrouded in tears, and to gather into your bosom his wives and daughters. These are two quotes of Genghis Khan, and I hope this really sets the stage for what we're going to be talking about today. All right, so Mongolia, both today and at this time, had a very small population. The two main religions or beliefs were Shamanism and Animism. Animism, by the way, is when you believe that like creatures and plants and places all have their own spirits or spiritual essence. They had this belief of manifest destiny and mandate of heaven. So God kind of told them to go conquer and that they would be allowed to conquer if they kept the mandate of heaven, aka God saw them as a worthy individual to conquer and to rule. And their diets were very meat rich, which gave them a lot of protein, therefore strength. And they drank this liquid called kumis, which is a fermented mare's milk. Right here it's depicted. It is kind of an interesting way to get drunk, honestly. Very lightly alcoholic. Who was Genghis Khan? Well, he was born Temujin. His grandfather created a loose confederation which had united the Mongols for a short time. This would eventually legitimize Genghis's rule later on in life. Some major events were he was sent to live with this enemy tribe as a boy. His father was murdered. He was responsible for killing his own brother. He was enslaved. Despite his father's death and being poor, he married the girl, which he had been kind of had an arranged marriage with later. Pretty soon after that, this wife was kidnapped. He eventually killed those who had captured her and raised the son that she carried, not knowing if it was his or not. Um, his blood brother Jamuka is who helped him with this daring attack on this enemy tribe, as well as some other pretty prominent Mongol leaders of the time. Eventually, Temujin and Jamuka had a big falling out based on this promotion by merit. He was seen as not following these Mongol traditions, and Jamuka actually got the better of him and defeated him and his army in this daring morning raid. Jamuka actually boiled Temujin's generals alive as kind of a big sign of how strong he was and how weak Temujin was. After this defeat, Temujin promoted a standing professional army. He focused on psychological warfare, such as having his soldiers light multiple fires to fake their numbers. He held their battle cries until the very last moment to save energy. He had squads held in reserve so as to not wear out all his soldiers at once. He used his archers as shock troops, and he would eventually defeat Jamuka at the Battle of the Burning Sands. Even though Jamuka escaped, two of Jamuka's top generals would eventually bring him to Temujin, and Temujin would have those generals executed because their acts were not seen honorable. And despite all of this, Temujin actually asked if Jamuka wanted to join his side, and Jamuka said no and pretty much asked to be executed because he knew that there could not be two suns in one sky. And therefore, Temujin executed Jamuka the way he requested, which was by breaking his back. So after defeating Jamuka, Genghis Khan eventually became the universal king, therefore making him the Genghis Khan, the name that we know him by today. He did this at age 42, which is kind of interesting when you think of the other conquerors of the time. Were normally a lot younger, which just goes to show that if you haven't done anything yet in your life, you got plenty of time, you know? So let's get into the first invasion of the Jin Dynasty. China's invaded. They go around the Great Wall. They pay off a mercenary force which joins Genghis Khan. The Chinese villages and countryside is completely destroyed and pillaged. And Beijing surrenders. However, they break this promise almost immediately after Genghis Khan has returned home, so he has to send his army back. Because of this, Genghis Khan takes no prisoners. He waits a very long time after he surrounds Beijing, and he pretty much starves them out, causing rampant cannibalism within the walls. They have run out of ammo to shoot at the Mongols, and the defected Chinese engineers are forced to make siege weapons to attack the city, which they do. Beijing is captured. The army is pretty much ruthless with the inhabitants there. They said that they plundered for over a month, and months later, possibly even a year later, ambassadors state that the bones of the slaughtered formed white mountains, and the soil was greasy with human fat. Just imagine how many people have to die for that to be the visual for when people return to that city. It's really hard to encapsulate just how horrible this battle was. All we know are an unknown thousands of people died at the hands of the Mongols. They were ruthless, and this idea that they were this unstoppable force began at this time. So Genghis Khan's empire was a little different than many. It actually adopted technology from those who it conquered. It had this religious freedom, and I use quotes here because really the only ones who were given freedom were those with power. This goes back to that Mandate of Heaven association, that only the ones who God saw as fit for having an empire were seen as strong enough to have religious freedoms. The regime relied on fear, so psychological warfare was a big thing. There was very few soldiers to occupy. There was very little policing that could take place by these few soldiers. So they destroyed entire cities and killed everybody within them if required. And punishments were harsh. And if someone revolted, it was pretty much an immediate certain death to everyone in that area. However, there were things like the Pony Express, known as the Yam, which was a very early method of getting information from point A to point B. There were pretty cool metal passports that some individuals were given, which would allow them to travel all over the empire. And they had invented this, or adopted and furthered this Uyghur script, which was kind of their written language. And there's this old saying that said that a man could travel from both sides of Genghis Khan's empire with a golden plate on his head and never be robbed. So you would imagine this was an unprecedented time of peace and prosperity in these regions. However, don't believe that anyone who ever got in the Mongols' way had the opportunity to exist in a peaceful environment. And speaking of a not peaceful environment, let's talk about the army. So we all associate Mongols with their bows and arrows, which were kind of the most important part. They had a extraordinarily long-ranged bow, which could shoot roughly 100 meters farther than their closest competitors. They carried a lot of arrows, sometimes 30 to 60 arrows into one battle. They wore the silk vest, which allowed the arrows that they were shot with to be pulled out. Their horses, which are pretty key to their battles. Most soldiers, having about 3 of them, could run up to 10 kilometers in a full-on gallop before needing to rest. And sometimes if the soldiers got tired, they would actually nick a little cut into the horse's neck and drink that blood as kind of like honestly, a early day Gatorade, just to give them a little boost. A lot of soldiers carried spears, and their supply train relied on the Bactrian camels, which are kind of cool. You should look those up if you have the opportunity. Logistics played a pretty major role in any long military projection power. Tactically, the soldiers relied on hit-and-run tactics because their army was pretty small, always less than 130,000 soldiers. They were pretty big on the feigned retreat. You may remember this from the Hannibal lecture, not to be mistaken for Hannibal Lecter. The feigned retreat is when your army pretends to retreat so that the enemy will follow you. And while that enemy has lost their structure, their lines are no longer solid, then you pretty much turn around and surround this enemy while they're in disarray. They relied heavily on ambushes, and they were pretty big on capturing enemies and forcing them to do really messed up things in order to attack those individuals' ally. Imagine going up against the Mongols and having to kill your brethren because those individuals are filling in your moats. Kind of scary when you think about it. So Genghis Khan eventually went to war with Persia, and this is because the Persians killed a Mongol ambassador. Mongols invaded and pretty much killed everybody who didn't surrender. The army was eventually just told to go west until they are stopped, and no one was able to stop them. So they just kind of rolled through and kept conquering different peoples. Their empire was over 4 times the size of Alexander the Great's and twice the size of the Roman Empire. Despite Genghis's attempt to find the elixir of life, he did die in the invasion of China. He possibly fell off his horse or he took an arrow to the knee. That's actually a true story. Possibly those who know much about video game culture know the saying. And a quote from his dying bed, which may or may not be true, is, "I have conquered for you a large empire, but my life too short to take the whole world. That I leave to you." His burial site was kept a secret, and possibly everybody who helped bury him was executed. Post-Genghis was his son Ogadai, who doubled the empire. He took in Russia, Poland, and invaded Hungary. However, he died due to alcohol use while preparing to invade Vienna. So just to put some perspective in here, the 13th to 14th centuries, there were 4 major khanates. The last of these fell some around 1335 after the Black Death. And technically, the Dzungar Khanate, I'm not saying that correctly, which is a Khanate in Inner Mongolia, did not fall until 1755. So what are the top takeaways and why were the Mongols important? Well, they played a vital role in globalization with the passage of information, ideas, and goods. They promoted religious freedom, kinda, as we learned. They treated those who they conquered relatively nice. They allowed them to keep their own traditions and beliefs as long as those individuals never challenged the Mongols' power. Ultimately, the Mongols redefined the word barbarian by challenging the Western beliefs of what a civilization is. And then just kind of a fun fact, Genghis Khan killed roughly 40 million people. And this is not including the number of people who indirectly died from the Silk Road and Silk Road routes, which were opened up or expanded thanks to the Mongols. And just those 40 million people helped with reforestation and scrubbed roughly 700 million tons of carbon from the atmosphere. So honestly, Genghis Khan kind of made the world a cooler place. And on that note, I'll let you guys go. I hope y'all enjoyed it.